Welcome to the Community Homeworks Workshop this evening. We're so glad that you're joining us tonight. My name is Tiana Harrison, and I'm the Education and Volunteer Coordinator at Community Homeworks. If you're joining us live, please feel free to comment and let us know where you're joining us from. Also, if you would like to join in on the discussions or ask a question, please put that in the comments as well. If you are viewing this after the live broadcast, we're still happy to answer your questions. It just might take us a little longer to respond. Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization with the mission to empower homeowners to maintain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. We get our funding from grants, gifts, and donations. So if you find value in this workshop tonight, we encourage you to donate on our website, communityhomeworks.org. Tonight's workshop is hand tool usage, and our instructor is Lee Taylor. Thanks for being here, Mr. Taylor. We look forward to learning more about hand tool usage.
Hopefully you can hear me all right. I never know what things on. Well, and so like some tape measures, which you can do. Of course, it won't do it. There you go. Sometimes you can do this where you can let it hook on and it frees up a hand and I can kind of do some other things if I need to. You can make it a little bit hard to read. Another thing you can do is you can lock the tape measure down. So when you're buying a tape measure, I don't care if it's used, I don't care if it's new, check the lock on it. So there's a couple of styles of locks out there. There's this style here. And what that does is it locks the actual tape in place so I can set it down and lock it at a certain point. There are some locks out there that make it so that you can't pull that tape out. And that's actually not a good thing. What it is you have two pieces inside here that are actually binding down onto this metal tape. And if they bind too hard or so hard that I can't get with two fingers pull it out, it's going to crimp it and it's going to lessen the life of that tape measure. So like I said, the locks, a couple of different styles. That's that style right there. Lets it so I can sit. And that's pretty common. This is a style here where I can lock it right there. But again, it still pulls out and that's normal. That's what you want. There are some out there that have a lock on the bottom. So when you pull it out, it automatically stays. And then when you want to retract it, you go ahead and press that bottom and we'll make it so it retracts in. This one is going to be hard to see, but I want to show you when you're looking at a tape measure, especially a used one or the one that you may have, what happens, and you can't really see it. Basically, I can feel it. So I'll run my finger across this edge like this. When I'm feeling for little nicks and little cuts, That's a result of that tape measure doing this, bending one too many times. If you're feeling a cut in it, or you open it up and there's, a section in here that's cut, I wouldn't even bother with it. And I'm talking use tape measures, or if you have a tape measure, that's one of those things where that metal is just going to fail. It's going to eventually break at that point. How is that caused? Well, just by abuse, people holding it, letting it bend over like this, dropping them, bending them like this. And yes, they do that, but again, you want to keep it to a minimum as far as how often you do that. So the other is that, and it seems goofy, especially if you're even in the store. I will point this one out. You have this part here that locks onto a piece of wood or something like that, right? Whatever it is that you're going to be measuring off of. Sometimes what happens is that even in the store, somebody can drop it and it can bang in like this. And then this piece, instead of being a nice 90-degree angle, is bent in. And that could mess with that can mess quite a bit with your measurements. So when you're looking at that, I take a quick look at it just to make sure it's at a nice 90-degree angle. If it's bent, well, there's a tool for that, right? Back to what I was saying, I like these little flat nose pliers. And this happens. Sometimes you'll drop it and pick it up and notice that's bent. You can grab it and carefully just bend it back a little bit until you're at that 90 degree. So that's one of those little things that can happen even in the store. So when you're measuring, I'm going to break this down this way. So I was talking about pencils and stuff. I want to show you something here. So this fat pencil, it does a pretty big mark, right? And that's fine, but of course I did it at that point. I'm going to do it here. You see how all of a sudden you can either be to this side or you can be to this side of the line. So sometimes those fat marks, can make it difficult to be able to see. I can do it this way, make it easier.
Thank you.
And then this one here versus this mark, where I can tell I'm right on that 1/4 inch mark right there, versus this fatter mark. And that's a fine detail, but that really can make a big difference. Like I said, it's broken down by inch increments, 1/2 inch, that's here and here, 1/4, that's 1/4, 1/8, 1/16. So, like I said, that's where sometimes if you're not necessarily used to reading a tape, getting something that's like this is really nice because it breaks it down. This one goes down. Those real small ones are. Unless you're building cabinets or something, that's one of those things that you probably are not going to be getting into. As far as care for the tape, really the main thing is that, like I said, when you're measuring something, say you're having to measure something a long ways like this, you can lay it down like this and be able to do, let's say you're measuring a room or something along that line, you can measure it out and bend that tape. But the issue is that when you lay it out on the floor like this, you're going to get crud and whatnot built on it. So some people have rags, some people use their shirt. I have a good shirt, and I'm not going to do that. But basically, you just want, as you're retracting it back in, you want to make sure that you're wiping off the sawdust or the water or whatever off of that, so that when it goes back in, it's not sitting in there and corroding or sitting in there and binding up a spring, because that's what's going on, is there's a spring inside here. The bigger the tape, the bigger the string, the stronger the spring is. On that note, and this is a minor thing, well, not minor if you do it, what can happen sometimes with that spring can be so strong that if you're holding that tape measure wrong and it starts to retract in, these are made out of metal, and so it can cut you. I've seen people get cut right in here really bad, or right in here really bad. So it's one of those little things you want to kind of think about when you're retracting that. Another one is, let's say I'm going to come on over here. So let's say I'm measuring down to like the floor or something. I'll just pick on this right here.
what people will do is, they'll hook on fine, and then they'll try to have their tape in here, or they'll put their tape and they'll say, "Oh, my tape's 3.5 inches," which is something you can do. Usually they'll say how wide that tape is. Me personally, I just like to bend it like this, and right there on that crease is where that measurement is. So like I said, that's kind of nice to have those little markings as far as the quarters and eighths and halves and all that good stuff. So like I said, tape measures. And it's one of those things, like I said, you get used to as you do it. I'm going to pick on this guy real quick. Remember I was talking about these smaller tape measures and how much of what you can get out of it as far as that stretch goes. And I'm not even getting to 4 foot before this thing breaks or snaps. So again, that's why I like the little wider tape measures that are out there in the world. There are some tape measures, last thing, where you have it marked on both sides. And that's actually a really good thing, because sometimes as especially if you're doing a long pull, it may turn or something along that line. And sometimes it's nice to be able to have that measurement on both sides. So some tape measures it that way. So again, just a lot of little things to look at. I've hit my 10 minutes on those. So, and as you said, if you have a question on tape measures afterwards, we can get into those a little bit more. So hammers are the next thing. So we talked real quick about the different style hammers last time, and I was saying that if you had a choice between what's called a curved claw and a rip claw, here's your two styles right here. This is your curved claw, this is your rip claw, and then pay no attention to the size. There are ones that even have a straighter rip claw. So I like as straight of a rip claw as you can get. Like I said, that's going to turn that into a lot more of a use as far as being able to use that tool. So here's the thing with hammers. So with the hammer, you want to get one that is going to be heavy enough. So, and this is why they have the different weights. Again, if you use a hammer all day and you're pounding all day, like I said, this is a 19 ounce, or even a 20 or a 22 ounce. The heavier the hammer, yes, the heavier it is, but the less you're going to have to be able to, the less you're going to have to be able to hit that nail. If you have a good framing hammer, you can hit that pretty good, versus a lighter weight hammer in a 16 ounce, where you're just not going to have that much swing or that much weight. Like I said, the weight is good, but if you're using it a lot, it can get to you. Generally, the heavier the hammer, the easier it is going to be able to drive that nail in. The other issue, and I got a big old honking nail to demonstrate this one. The other issue with hammering that most people have an issue with is how they actually hit that nail. So this is why I found this big old nail to kind of show this. So what happens a lot of times is when you're nailing, whatever angle that nail's at, right? You want to match, I'm going to say, let's say that angle of that nail is like this. You want to match the head of your hammer with the head of that nail in that way. If you go like this, tipped a little bit, or tipped a little bit, you're going to end up bending that nail. All right. So that's the first thing you want to do, is you want to be able to match the head angle to the head angle of that nail and keep that relatively straight. The other is, the more you hit a nail, or, lightly tap it, I guess is a better way to say it, it's going to get fatigued. So what will happen is that, you're pounding a nail in, and I should have done this. But if you tap it, what's going to happen is that, I'll make this thing bend. It's going to fatigue it, right? And it's going to bend that nail. And that's a real common thing that happens. So somebody thinks they have to be able to pull that nail out. Not necessarily the case. And usually if that's the case, so, showing that a nail is bending kind of prematurely, what you want to do is add a little bit more force to it. You can straighten it up. You can see how I'm using that rip claw to be able to grab it and be able to turn it a little bit and straighten it back out. With this one, you can tell right here where it's kind of bending this way like this. So a thing I will do on that is, at this point, I will hit it on this side just a little bit to be able to help drive that in. Because again, if I hit it straight on when that nail is not straight in the first place, it's going to want to bend again. So sometimes kind of counteracting that bend in that nail is useful. If you have to pull a nail for some oddball reason, right? The issue is a lot of times you want to be able to pull that nail. So depending, sometimes people get it in this far. You can't get enough leverage, right? If I don't have something underneath my head, I always want to pull it towards me like that. Now, if I have a nail like this and there's quite a bit more in there, I'm going to have a hard time to try to get that nail out. But if I have a longer hammer, more leverage, and I don't fling this back at me, yeah, I can't do it because it's right. And again, this is not attached. But a trick you can do is if you have a nail that does not want to come out or the head pops off or something along that line, and sorry to say having a couple of nails is nice, or a couple hammers, I can drive that in so I'm digging into that nail head, and I can go like this and turn it, bend it, reapply it. This is hard because I'm not attached to anything. And then I can bend it like this. And I can just keep going back and forth like that to be able to get that nail out. And this will work, like I said, if the head's broken off or anything along that line. But again, that leverage makes it so that I can get that nail out. Yes, it destroys your nail, but like I said, that little bit of leverage or, not having that head or something like that is going to make it so that you can actually pull that nail out. I'm going to pick on this guy real quick. I'm going to nail this guy in. That's the other thing. Loud. So say you have a nail like that, right? That's really dug in there. And you need to get it out for some oddball reason, right? That's where that cat's paw comes in. And you say that we talked about this last week. Trick with that is you're going to get it. See the grain of the wood? Grain of the wood's run this way. I'm going to go. I don't know. You may want to come over here. You might be able to see it a little bit easier. I'm going to go with that grain like that and dig in. And what that's going to do is it's going to get underneath there. And again, this is hard because this is all loose. Normally, you're not having that issue because you're on a structure of some sort. But you're going to dig in to be able to get underneath that. And I want to point something out on this. You can see how this is all curved down like this, and it's not real sharp. That's the issue we're having here, plus that wood is moving on us. But that's the idea, is that you dig underneath, and then you tilt it a little bit to be able to get underneath it. Just enough to be able to start prying that up. But like I said, you can see what it does to that wood. It really can tear it up. So like I said, that's kind of a last resort. Sometimes you don't necessarily have to pull that nail out, and I'm not going to keep on going after this, but that's what that cat's paw is for. If you absolutely have to pull that out, I could have gone after that wall, but I want a Rector display. So, but yeah, that's what the cat's paw is about. So the other thing with these hammers is, and we talked about this before too, you can see this leftover mark here. What that is this waffle head. And it's basically meant to be able to grab. So if you're hammering or something like that, This is for like rough framing or something along that line where I can hit this and it's not going to glance off that nail head as easily. But it will leave that bit of a issue behind. So if you are doing finish work, which most people are, you want to make sure it's a flat style head. All right. So a couple more things as far as some of these basics on these hammers. We talked about the head being loose. Now, that's about all I said last time. A couple things you can do. So if it's a wooden handled, you're going to look at the top. Most of the time, you're going to see these wedges. And sometimes this wood shrinks up and these wedges move a little bit, and this head will start to get a little loose. So this is where, again, having that rip claw hammer, because what I can do now is I can put this in a vise, or I can just hold on to it. I can tap those wedges in. Sometimes you can actually do it with the head of your hammer. And then sometimes that's enough to be able to drive that wedge in and spread that out a little bit and make that head so it sticks on a little bit better. The other thing you can do is some people will put this in like a bucket of water overnight or something like that, and what that will do is swell up the wood in that area and make that so it holds a little bit better. If it's consistently not wanting to hold, you're consistently having to drive that in, that's where you want to go ahead and replace that handle, because sometimes this just gets so chewed up in there with those wedges. Some people will add another little wedge in there. You can buy those at the hardware store and stuff, and that's fine, but past a certain point, it's not going to work. These, usually on fiberglass style handles. This right here is just a resin. Sometimes that breaks out. You can actually buy that resin at most of the hardware stores. So what you do is set it up. I usually put tape around it where the head meets the handle, duct tape or something like that, and then you can kind of clean that stuff out and mix up this epoxy and pour it in there, let it sit for however long it says, and then that's enough to really get that all put on there and holding good. The other thing is that some hammers, this one doesn't have, you might have a bunch of damage right in here, missed strikes or something. That's where somebody's hammering, they actually hit like this instead of hitting on the head. And like I said, if that's all damaged and beat in all the way, you're just asking for that to come flying off. So like I said, if that's the case and it's a Will style handle, go ahead and replace it. Fiberglass, you're not going to really have that as much. You may have a few dents and dings. It's one of the nice things about these fiberglass hammers. The metal ones, like I was talking about before, and this is a smaller version of it, and that's a more extreme. You can see how there's quite a bend on that. Like I said, I would not even use this hammer. On a hammer like this, you can't really fix. That's the style, tube style like this. So with hammers, I guess the best thing to say is when you're going to hit something, go ahead and hit it. Try to make sure you stay in line with that nail, and use the heaviest hammer that you're comfortable with. You're less likely to have issues of that nail bending and everything else. So, and two, like I said, when you're using it, if you're buying a hammer or something along that line, see how it feels in your hands. If it doesn't feel right in your hands, it's not going to feel right, when you're using it. So that's one of those things that you just want to kind of keep in mind when you're using those hammers. And again, practice makes perfect. That's the biggest thing. So, all right. So pliers and coffee. Oh yeah. It's the best part. It's all the best things in life. All right. So pliers. Kind of trying to keep track on these. So I'm gonna touch on one thing in specific about pliers in general. I don't really care what kind of plier it is. So you have a movable and a non-movable. So in this case, like these adjustable pliers, this is the movable side, this is the immovable side. All right. With slip joint pliers, a little trickier. I always count this as the movable side. and this is the more fixed, I guess. Why am I saying that? Well, the reason is this. If you're prying on something, you want to think about how you're holding that. And why is that? You want all the force to go to that fixed or as fixed of a point as you can. So in this case here, I'll pick on this guy down here. I'm going to go ahead and tighten this. And you're looking at it a little backwards, but so I'm turning this way and the force is going up against this. Now, is that that big of a deal? Most of the time, no. Sometimes, yes. So what can happen is if you turn this, and let's say I'm turning it this way, so this is turning clockwise. If I'm tightening it like that and putting all my force up against that movable spot or on the tool itself, it is more likely to slip or come out of adjustment or something along that line. Kind of the same deal with this. So, you know, it depends on, like I said, how I'm holding it. And again, so I'll adjust it how I want it, right? And my force is going to be up here versus down here, all right? If you're not quite sure as far as where that force is, gently grab your finger and do this, and you'll feel it. Like I can feel this is digging down more than this bottom one here. So, and that's just most any pliers. Like I said, pliers like this, you can't really do that with necessarily, but it's a little detail that makes life a lot easier. I'm clumping a lot of tools into pliers because there are quite a bit of pliers out there, but a lot of the same rules apply. So here's another thing, and we were talking about these slip joint pliers last week. With these, like I said, this size, these two sizes right here are good. They're going to cover most everything you're going to need. The issue is this. So what you want to do is, let's say you have something that's relatively large that you have to clamp onto, right? Let's go over here to this handrail, yeah? I'm going to wreck their handrail. No, I'm not. So that's about as much as that thing can grab, right? But the reason I'm saying this is that you want to look, see how my hands still wrap around this? Relatively easy. My fingers kind of wrap around like this. My thumb wraps around it. If it's opened up like this, let's say, and you can't get your fingers around it or your hand around it, it's not really going to do you any good. So again, this is one of those things that it kind of makes a difference as far as the size of the hands of the person that's using them. If you are constantly, let's say you're constantly finding out that you're having to grab onto something that's so big that you just can't get your hands to really necessarily wrap around, what you may want at that point is to jump up to a little bit larger size of these slip joint pliers, because like I said, a good point, like I said, is to be able to wrap your fingertips and get your thumb around it. So that's what you want to kind of keep in mind. This one, and I forgot to grab a second nut because I'm a goofball. I can do it with this, though. So remember how I was saying you might want to have two of these because you may have to have some hold on to something. So in this case here, and this is not quite right, but I'm just using this as demonstration. I'm going to use this to hold this bottom one. So then I can hold it, and then I can go ahead and adjust this one where I can turn this now, and I'm not having to, the whole thing is it's not spinning, so I have one holding it here. Now you can do the same thing with a pair of vice grips or locking pliers like that. That's why I said those are nice. Sometimes you'll be able to lock that down and keep that other side from spinning. Same deal here. This is your operable side here. This is your fixed side. So how you apply it just depends. So yes, got to make the sound effects too. Oh, it's picking at me. So, and like I said, you know, the other thing too with pliers is, you know, like I said, lots of different sizes and everything else. I mean, you know, you have a standard needle nose pliers like this. There are needle nose pliers out there that are really big. And again, it just boils down to what you need. I mean, there's a pair of needles pliers that's that long. So, like I said, if there's a need for it, there's a hand tool made for it. So, but like I said, the pliers, there are a lot of different styles of pliers and everything else, but usually you find out pretty quick what you can need, what you're going to be able to get away with, what you're not going to be able to get away with, that sort of thing. So, keeping track on my time. And we talked about maintenance on them as far as lubing them up with oil or something along that line. I do want to pick on one thing I forgot last week. So a lot of these tools you're noticing are made out of metal, which is good. But what you want to do, we talked about this with that penetrating oil as far as wiping them down, kind of occasionally so that they don't rust. Sometimes you get those moisture packets in medicine bottles or whatever. Save those, especially if you have a toolbox that you're leaving in a moist area like your shed or garage or even a damp basement or something along that line. I always throw those in, a couple of them in my toolbox. And it makes it so that they're going to sit there and absorb up some moisture and your tools aren't going to flash rust. The other thing, and I'm throwing this in for real quick, is when you're using your toolbox, it sounds silly, but close it when you're not using it. And when I mean close it, I mean close it and latch it. That keeps dirt, dust, grime, rain, all sorts of things out of it. You wouldn't believe how many times that somebody will close it, but they don't latch it. Somebody comes along and picks this whole toolbox up and everything goes flying everywhere. On that note, as far as getting water and whatnot in it, sometimes I will drill a couple of small weep holes in it just to be able to let that water out, because sometimes, especially if you don't pull this top tray off, you can get into the bottom of that toolbox and may have gotten wet for whatever reason, and it's just filled with water, and all your tools are slowly rotting away. So, like I said, if that's the case, or you find that's happening to you more often than you'd like, drill a couple small holes in it and make it so that you're not having to have that issue, and you have an area where it can actually be able to weep out. All right, so socket sets. So this is my socket set from home, and this is really not that. There are much larger socket sets, there are much smaller socket sets. Me personally, this is about all I've ever needed. Don't ask me how many pieces it is. I don't know. I've added to it. But like I said, you have different lengths. So like I said, the thing with hand tools that you want to remember is the longer the handle, the more force or the more leverage you're going to have. And that is the case with any hand tool pretty much. So yeah, I have 3 different lengths. There are also 3 different sizes. So you can see how I have a little small guy here, one in the middle, and a larger one for some of these larger sockets and stuff. So like if let's say I'm pulling off that blade like on the lawnmower or something like that, I'm going to grab something like this. I got more leverage. I got a bigger connection point to be able to pull and break that bolt on that lawnmower. So the other thing is, I'll pick on this guy here, is how do you use it? Well, I will pick on this guy. So I'm going to put him on, and you'll see this one here has this little ball. And we talked about that ball and other hand tools. Basically what it is just so that I could slide that on, and that socket does not come off very easily unless I press that button, and it pops off a lot easier. So then there's this thing. There's an adjustment bat down here. So hear that click, click, click? So in this case, I'm turning clockwise, and I'm hearing that ratcheting sound. This way, counterclockwise, would be loosening. So where I don't hear that click or I feel that resistance, counterclockwise loosening, clockwise is tightening unless you're in a reverse bolt style situation. But that's what that little flip handle does. All right. Different styles, different types. Oh, let's see. So here's a Here's a style that's similar, same Craftsman, right? Has that little press. Here's a style. This style here, you actually turn that, but it does the same thing. That way, and then I flip it. So, like I said, they may look a little different, but they do the same thing. So they just make it so that you can actually be able to use that socket set. The other thing I like about these sockets is I can use like a deep well socket to be able to get into something that's a little bit further in. Sometimes you need even more reach. So I can get something like this and connect all this up. And now I can reach down in further to be able to loosen it up or to tighten it. And like I said, so sometimes having a variety of different extensions. See, I've got 2 of this size. I got a small one here. I got a really long one here. So, like I said, having something like that, and sometimes you end up having to buy those separate, but I throw them in to match anyways. So, that is the nice thing about having that socket set. If for some reason you're having a hard time busting loose a bolt or something along that line, you can tap it. Now, we were talking about hammers earlier. Sometimes having like a rubber mallet or a kind of like a plastic mallet or something like that is nice, because I don't want to hit my my expensive socket set necessarily with a metal tool, but with a rubber handle or a plastic mallet, something along that line, I can give it a couple whacks and I'm not going to end up wrecking my tools. So sometimes you may need that to be able to kind of break that loose occasionally, especially if that bolt has not been off in a long time. So, but like I said, socket sets are really nice. This is part of this socket set that I actually had, where this is that magnetic piece that I was talking about. So I can have a lot of these little bits, and I can slip in all different flat, whatever in there, and be able to trade them out. And then when these die, I just buy new ones. So that's where having something like this is going to be nice. And that's part of what I'm talking about with the screwdrivers. So, like I said, set like this, you need one like this. But like I said, this is one I'm used to at home, and I do most of my maintenance on most of the things with this. So socket sets are nice. Trying to keep them all together is another thing. I have one I'm missing that I don't know where the heck it went. But the nice thing is that I can go down to the store and actually buy the piece that I'm missing. So like I said, they'll sell those things. Sometimes you may get a socket set that closes up, and the issue is that you may not have enough strength to be able to keep all these. So when you pick it up, everything shifts. So what I've done, like with this one, is I needed a little bit of space. I got some old carpet pad, cut it down like that, put it in there. Now what I can do is I can close that and we'll keep tension on it, and I can go ahead and carry this, do whatever I need. Biggest thing is understand how it opens. I've done this a couple times where it's upside down and like open it up and everything goes. So this is nice. It's marked out. Hey, this side up, that side down, whatever it says. It's a minor thing, but it's saves a lot of time as far as the hassle of going through.
Putting everything back.
Yeah, putting everything back and trying to find everything. So, all right. So screwdrivers. So screwdrivers are more screws on the floor.
Yeah.
Man, it's like somebody was banging on or something. All right. So first thing I want to talk about, and I'm gonna pick on this 6-in-1, is the size of the screws. So if you can see this, how small this one is versus this guy right here. And I don't think we have a number 3 here. A number 3 would be much larger. So they go by numbers. So this is a number 1 Phillips. This is a number 2, the most common Phillips. And then the number 3 is much larger than that. I couldn't necessarily find one when I was looking around for one. So that's the first thing you want to know or understand about them. Why is that important? Well, because it boils down to what size screw. So let's say you have a small screw like this, right? This is relatively common in different things. You can't even really see it right there. But that right there is a number 1 Phillips. Now, if I were able to try to fit a number 2 in there, it might work. It might not. So you want to make sure that the screwdriver that you're using is the correct size for the screw head. That's the first thing. And you can have a lot of variances on that. This is like a number 3 right here. You can see the size difference. The issue is that a number 2 will fit into a number 3, but you have a lot of slop in there. And what's going to happen is as you're turning that, especially by hand or even worse, a screw gun, is you're going to end up stripping out either the screw or the bit. So sometimes having, like you said, having, like I said, a 6-in-1 like this is great. Sometimes you need that like number 3, which is a much larger Phillips or flathead or something along that line. You can see this one here. See how this has kind of a square end to it versus like that. So that's for a number 3. That's a number 2 right there. So understanding that and then understanding the sizes. The other thing is that, and this is similar to hammering and everything else. So when you're running that screw in, I'm going to find, I'm going to look at it. I'm going to say, all right, yep, that's a number 2. And this is just experience. After a while, you'll be able to look at it and tell. They said number 2 is the most common. So I'm going to, when I'm running that screw in, sometimes what people have the hardest thing to do is to get it started. Remember that hammer we had? This is a nice little trick. Sometimes all you need is just a little hammer to be able to do it. But again, just like your hammer, you want to be able to have that screw in line with the screwdriver in line with that screw. So you don't want it kicked off this way or this way. You want it to be right in line. You want it to be the correct size, meaning there's not much slop in here. And just applying pressure. So when I'm applying pressure, I'm actually pressing here on my palm and using my hands just to kind of hold that screwdriver straight. I'm running that in, right? Now, the issue is depending on how hard that screw is to get in. This is something a lot of people end up having trouble with. The harder the wood or the more dense the wood, or having a very long screw, you're going to be feeling it usually halfway through, right? Right, I'm struggling already. So how do you prevent that? I'm going to leave that there. So let's say you're having to apply a screw. You want a nice little trick. Throw some candle wax or some old soap, something along that line. And what you're doing is you're actually rubbing that wax or that soap into the threads. And then you go ahead and apply it. It's not going to affect anything. It's just going to make it so when you're running that screw in, it makes it go in so much easier. So, and it's less likely to be able to strip that head out. So, like I said, when you're working with that screwdriver, usually that's the biggest thing is, just having the correct size head to the correct style screw, and then understanding that there are different styles out there. So we're talking about Phillips, number 1, 2, and 3. There are ones out there that are Torx. So I'll show you these. So you can see these, how they have like a hex size. And they're technically called torque. If they're on a package or something like that, it's going to say T, and that stands for the torque. The lower the number, the smaller it is. So, like I said, if you get a
if you buy a box of screws, most of the time, this is something else to check. If that box
Has
is
been opened in the store, open it up and make sure somebody hasn't taken the little bit out. That happens a lot. But, you know, if, like this one here is a T15, and it can get all the way up to a T30, which is something that's like that big or, you know, larger. And again, that's back to why I like those, where over here, what I can do is, if I have an oddball like that, I can get my screwdriver and I can find whatever bit I have. So that's a Torx right there. And I can see it on the side. Mine's starting to get old. So this says T15. I could put that in there. And now I have a nice little thing. And like I said, you can have one of those bit cases that have all those different styles and sizes of bits in there. A little hand screwdriver like this that has a little magnetic head to be able to drop those in is so nice. So, and the Torx are, you're going to usually find these on things like deck screws, things like that are going to make it so that they're a lot less likely to strip out, and they're going to hold, and they're going to be able to withstand treated lumber. So I'll pick on that real quick. So you're gonna hear us talking about treated lumber versus non-treated. So if you look at this lumber, say, right, see how it has this green tinge to it versus lumber like this, it's more of a blonde color. This is treated with chemicals so that it's meant to be outside. This is not. So it doesn't matter if it's a nail, it doesn't matter if it's a screw. I want to point this out. So back to our big old screw. See how this has this gray color versus, say, something like that, or like this, where it's shiny. This gray color of hot dip galvanizing is designed for treated lumber. The screws can be a lot harder. A screw like this black screw, this is like a drywall screw or all-purpose screw, was not necessarily meant to go into treated lumber. But these, and they'll say that on the packaging, meant for treated lumber, something along that line, are meant to go into treated. So this is one of those things where, depending on how you're fastening things and what you're fastening, you want to keep that in mind. You can see this, how this has that kind of a dark gray color on it. That's kind of a hot dip galvanized nail that is suitable for treated lumber. And the reason I say that is, depending on what you're building, I've seen where somebody builds a deck and they use the wrong style screws or fasteners or nails or whatever. And especially if that lumber gets wet and dries and gets wet again and dries, all that hard work and money and everything else is just going to go and fall apart. Even screws that are meant for treated, or nails that are meant for treated, they'll last 25 years. On my deck, I used treated screws. It was 24 years ago, something along that line, and now I have to go through and replace them all because they finally eroded away. But that treated lumber is corrosive, so understanding the fasteners that you put on it make a huge difference on that. And again, save your money. Yes, it is expensive to buy the right style screw for the right style lumber, but it's a lot less money than having some major failure or having to redo it later. So that's in the line of screwdrivers. So here's the other thing that I was talking about with these 6-in-1s. You can see how you run across screws like this. They may have, a flat surface, but then they also have this hex. That is designed, it's one of those standard sizes, so that's where you can have one of those hex drivers or nut drivers. That's what these are for. Versus this is too small for it, right? But this is just a smaller version of that. So like I said, if you have that option, instead of trying to use a flat blade screwdriver, use that hex driver. It's going to make life a lot easier. You can even get those hex drivers and whatnot in your socket sets, to where, I have a thing here that I can hold. I have a thing right here that makes it so that I can slip this in like this, and then I can put whatever size I want on it, and I can use that as kind of a hex drive. So like I said, a lot of different ways you can do things. So, but having that option is nice, and that's part of the reason I like these 6-in-1s. So small details like that. All right. No one's asking questions. It's throwing me off. Yeah, I'm watching it. So, all right, flat bars, pry bars. Yeah, we talked about that already. So, we were talking about these flat bars earlier. Remember, I was saying that this right here is designed to be able to cut nails. So, I'm not going to do it, but I'll show you what I'm talking about. We're going to go over here. So let's say you have a demolition project, right? And you have two pieces of wood that are nailed together. And you're looking at it and you're going, oh my gosh, how do I get in here? So you're looking at this, right? You can tell that this is nailed in. They got a couple screws or nails, right? What I can do with this is it's designed where I can say, let's say there's a nail right here. I can get this flat bar. No, I'm not going to wreck the thing. I'm going to drive this in with that hammer, right? And get in there, open it up just a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is just enough to where I can put this in and then tap this in. And what I can do at that point is use that leverage to be able to pull, right? It'll open that up. If there's a nail in there and I can see that nail, say it's a 16 or an 8, doesn't really matter. I can put that nail right in that little V-notch of this, give it a couple of good whacks, and it's going to be able to cut through that nail. So the thing with flat bars, pry bars, anything along that line, and I say any kind of prying tool, is you always want to pry, all right? You don't necessarily want to push. A couple things can happen with pushing. We talked about like the metal fatiguing and breaking. And all of a sudden you're falling face forward. You just have more control when you're doing a little bit of a pull on that. Big pry bars and stuff like that too. You want to organize them so that you're doing a pull like this. It's just a lot safer to be able to do. If you're having to pry something, so let's say it's something like this. I'm not saying it would be this, but I'm saying, say it's a piece of trim or something like that. When I'm using a flat bar, and again, different styles of flat bars out there. There are some flat bars that are really, really thin, and you actually find them usually more so in automotive stores. They're super thin, and what that is, the nice thing about that is that if I'm having to get in between something and I don't want to damage it, so I'm having to get back in here, sometimes the thickness of this may be a little bit too much, so I can get that thinner, flatter pry bar, and just enough to be able to get in there to be able to wiggle it gently and then start to work my way up. So that's the thing. So let's say you're pulling off something like trim or baseboard or casing or whatever, right? Something you want to save. I get in there, open that up a little bit, change my flat bar over to something like this. I may have to put a piece of something on the wall so I'm not damaging that drywall or that plaster. And then I'm getting in there, gently tapping in. And again, I'm going to pull down like this or push up just a little bit to release it and then move my way up that board. Working my way up, and it's going to slowly start moving out this way, right? Then I get to the top, and now I have that whole board, and I can pull that thing out. There may be nails sticking down into it this way, so I may have to grab it and pull it. You may have the same thing on the bottom. So that's where having that cutting surface on that. You said you just don't want to go after things because, like you said, if you do it deliberately and carefully, you can save that piece of trim. And it doesn't sound like much until you start pricing trim out. It's a lot of money all of a sudden. So if it's something you want to reuse, gently pull that out using a variety of different style pry bars. Will make your life a lot easier. A lot of times when you pull that off, you may have a bunch of nails sticking out from the backside, and you don't see anything on the front because they've set them like with a nail set and they put putty over them and everything else. So what people have a tendency to do is pound those nails through the backside and then pull them out the front. You don't want to do that. This is where, if you have that nail after you've used your pry bar, and let's say you have that nail sticking out. So I'm looking at it in this sense, right? This is your finished edge. This has all been sunk and puttied, and you have this nail sticking out like this. Instead of driving it through this way, because if you do that, it's going to blow out whatever, and you're going to have repairs on that face. What you do, this is back to having these lock joint pliers or a pair like this, is I have that nail sticking up, and you see how this has a curved end. I can actually grab onto that nail. I'm not actually going to do it. I can grab onto that nail and use that curved end and rotate it up and pull it out. That way I'm not blowing it out on the surface that you're going to see. And I can get rid of the nail and be able to not have extra work. And I can do the same thing with these. So this is the point I'm making is that you can do a lot of different things with hand tools. Like I said, usually the things are endless, really, of what you could do. As I said, sometimes it's just creativity. Once you get used to it, you get used to what you're supposed to do with it, and then you find out all the extra little things that you can do. So I think saws, I want to pick on saws real quick because we only have a couple minutes left. So we were talking about hacksaws. And like I said, this was our basic hacksaw and then our mini that we had. So this is the issue here. So sometimes you're going to have a nail that, you can't really pull out. You don't want to damage it or anything along that line. You may have to cut it for whatever reason, right? So this is where, I can lay this flat, or if I have the type where I can rotate it, I can go ahead and start cutting that nail, right? You got to be careful because you're going to get Mars and whatnot, right? So this is where sometimes having that one that can rotate a little bit. How you put that hacksaw blade in? This is for metal blade cutting. This is not for wood. How you put that blade in makes a difference. So sometimes the cut is going to be on the push. The teeth and the sensor push this way. If you look at them real closely, you're going to see they're angled one way or the other. So sometimes you're going to have the cut on the push. Sometimes you're going to have the cut on the pull, depending on how that blade's in. And let's say you're using one, and it keeps binding up and everything else. And that happens a lot of times where it just doesn't want to move. Generally, that means is that you're pushing too hard. You're not letting the tool do the work. So back off it a little bit and let that tool do that work. And you'll feel that difference. And that hand tool will tell you, when it is cutting the way it needs to. Instead, if it's binding, something along that line, or it's not comfortable because it's cutting, say, on the pull stroke, you can take that blade off and flip it around. The more teeth there are, the finer it's going to be. Generally, the finer cut it's going to make, the more teeth there are. Generally, the faster it's going to be, but quicker it can wear out. And we're at an hour. So, like I said, tons of different hand tools out there. Practice makes perfect. Keep on using them. If you find any new or interesting uses of the tools we talked about tonight, leave a comment. I can always learn something new every day. So, thank you.
Wanted to thank everyone for joining in to tonight's workshop about hand tool usage. Mr. Taylor always provides us with so much information that we can really, really use. And just wanted to thank him for that and wanted to make sure that he had a really great weekend because I think he's celebrating something special.
No.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.